We tend to look at the history of life on Earth like a blockbuster movie franchise where the first movie was just way too good. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. The dinosaurs.
Right, the dinosaurs, they had the size, the teeth, the drama, they had this incredible 100 million year run, and then boom.
The asteroid
The
hits.
asteroid hits, the credits roll, and everyone just assumes the sequel is this low-budget, boring spin-off.
Which is really a tragedy because the sequel is actually where the plot gets incredibly complicated.
Exactly. And that's what we're getting into today. We are doing a deep dive into the Cenozoic Era, the last 66 million years, the era that you and I are literally breathing in right now.
Yeah, and it's often called the age of mammals. But looking at the sources we're unpacking today, specifically the Cenozoic Climate and Life Report, that label does a massive disservice to the geology.
It really does. It implies that the stage just stayed exactly the same, and only the actors changed. Like the dinosaurs walked off the set and the mammals just sort of wandered onto the same green screen.
Right, but the report makes it clear that the stage itself was undergoing a complete demolition and reconstruction.
Yeah, reading through the stratigraphy, the geochemistry, the tectonic movements in this report, it's really a story about a planet fighting to recover its balance.
It's a story of a biosphere clawing its way back from the brink, and a climate system crashing from this intense greenhouse world where you literally had crocodiles in the Arctic to the icehouse world that you see today.
And it wasn't a smooth slide down the thermometer either. I mean, we're going to talk about some massive chaotic spikes.
No, the swings are wild.
We're talking about whales deciding to walk back into the ocean. We're talking about horses evolving teeth specifically to eat dirt.
And how a slow-motion car crash between India and Asia might actually be the reason you need to wear a winter coat today.
It is a messy and absolutely fascinating 66 million years. So the mission for this deep dive is to track that exact journey. How did Earth go from this hot dinosaur-free vacuum to a frozen human-inhabited world?
We have to start at the scene of the crime.
The KPG boundary. 66 million years ago.
Exactly. The asteroid is hit, the dust is settling. And if you look at the fossil record right at that boundary, the situation on the ground is just, it's silence.
Absolute silence. That's a haunting image.
It's the only way to describe it, really. The Cretaceous-Paleogene mass extinction event wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs, obviously, but also the pterosaurs that ruled the skies and the massive marine reptiles.
The mosasaurs and plesiosaurs.
Right, and it created what ecologists call an ecological vacuum.
I want to pause on that term for a second because ecological vacuum sounds a bit abstract. What does that actually mean practically on the ground?
Okay, imagine a bustling city where suddenly every single person, every car, every bus just vanishes overnight.
So the buildings are still there?
The infrastructure is there, the trees, the rivers, the soil,
Yeah.
but the consumers, the movers, the apex predators, they're just gone. The food web completely collapsed.
The massive herbivores that kept the forests trampled down are gone.
Exactly. So it's essentially a blank check for whatever survived.
A void. And nature absolutely abhors a vacuum.
It does. And what the sources highlight is just how aggressively life rushed in to fill that void. This is the Paleocene epoch, the recovery phase.
And when you say aggressively, the data in the report is actually shocking. It mentions that in North America, mammalian taxonomic richness, which is basically just the number of different mammal species, it doubled within just 100,000 years of the extinction.
Which, in geological time, is instantaneous. It's a blink of an eye.
But it wasn't just that there were more types of animals running around. They got bigger. Much, much bigger.
Right, because remember, the mammals that actually survived the asteroid were the underdogs. They were small, mostly nocturnal, shrew-like creatures.
Probably hiding in burrows while the surface was burning.
Exactly. But within that same first 100,000 years, their body mass rocketed back up to pre-extinction levels. And by 300,000 years post-extinction, the maximum body mass had increased threefold.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I feel like we often use evolution as this magic wand. You know, you don't just get big by wishing for it.
You need calories.
Exactly. You need fuel. If the world was a post-apocalyptic wasteland, how are these animals fueling a threefold increase in size?
That is the critical question the report addresses. You cannot build a massive mammal without protein. And this brings us to one of my favorite hypotheses in the source material, the protein bar theory.
Which involves, and I couldn't believe this when I read it, beans.
The Leguminosae, the bean family.
I love that the recovery of the entire planet basically hinged on the appearance of the bean.
It sounds trivial, but it's brilliant biochemical engineering. The fossil record shows the appearance of the Leguminosea family at roughly 700,000 years post-extinction.
So why does that matter? Why are beans different from, I don't know, a fern or a pine tree?
It's all about nitrogen. Nitrogen is the fundamental building block of protein. Now, most plants really struggle to get nitrogen out of the soil.
It's a limiting factor for growth.
Exactly. But legumes, they evolved this incredible symbiotic relationship with bacteria in their root nodules.
So they have bacteria living in their roots.
Yes, and these bacteria can actually fix nitrogen directly from the air.
So the plant basically has its own built-in fertilizer factory.
Precisely. This allows legumes to pack their seeds and their leaves with incredible amounts of protein compared to other plants.
Okay, so before the bean arrived, what were the herbivores eating?
Mostly low-calorie roughage. Ferns, basic gymnosperms. To get big on ferns, you have to be an inefficient, massive digestion machine.
Think of the giant sauropod dinosaurs with those huge gut vats.
Right. But with high-protein legumes entering the scene, mammals suddenly had access to high-density nutrition. The report suggests that this is what fueled the metabolic complexity and the rapid size increase we see in the Paleocene.
It's like the biosphere suddenly invented energy drinks, and we see the results of this calorie boom in the fossils. The report talks specifically about Eoconodon and Taeniolobus.
Yes, these are key examples of how fast the ecosystem got complicated. And this is still less than 1,000,000 years after the apocalypse.
Oh, wait, so what are they?
Well, you have Eoconodon, which was a specialized carnivore. And living right next to it in the fossil beds was Taeniolobus, which was a fairly large herbivore with these very specific, complex shearing teeth.
Why is that specific pairing significant? Don't we always have herbivores and carnivores?
Not this quickly after a reset. Usually, immediately after a mass extinction, you have what paleontologists call a disaster fauna.
Disaster fauna, so like generalists.
Exactly. Raccoons eating trash, essentially. Animals that do a little bit of everything to survive.
Yeah.
But here, practically overnight, in geologic terms, we see true niche partitioning.
You have a dedicated predator and a dedicated plant eater.
Right. The ecosystem wasn't just recovering its numbers, it was structuring itself. It was building a brand new hierarchy.
And speaking of hierarchy, we have to talk about our own family tree in this new world, or at least the very, very deep roots of it. The report mentions a little creature called Purgatorius.
Ah, yes. Purgatorius, found in deposits in Montana and dated to about 63 million years ago.
So not just 3 million years after the dinosaurs.
Yes. And it is widely considered the stem ancestor of all later primates.
So this is our great-great-great times a billion grandpa.
Yeah.
What did Purgatorius actually look like?
Small.
Mm.
Very unassuming. It probably looked a bit like a modern squirrel or a tree shrew, but the teeth tell the real story.
It always comes back to teeth in paleontology, doesn't it?
It does, because teeth are the hardest part of the body. They survive the fossilization process the best. Purgatorius had this distinct elongated lower molar and an enlarged upper central incisor.
What does that tell us?
Those features distinguish it from other placental mammals running around at the time. They suggest it was already adapting to a very specific diet in the trees, likely a mix of soft fruit and insects.
Eating bugs and fruit in Montana. It's a humble beginning for the lineage that would eventually build spaceships.
Very humble.
But while mammals are having this massive explosion of diversity on land, something really interesting is happening in the sky. The birds.
Yes.
Because I always assumed birds just kind of took off, no pun intended, after the dinosaurs died because the skies were empty.
That was the prevailing wisdom for a very long time. It was called the Big Bang Theory of bird evolution. The idea was that modern birds radiated almost exclusively after the KPG event.
But the report says that's not quite right.
No, recent genomic work and better fossil analysis have debunked that. It's much more nuanced. Many modern bird lineages actually started diversifying in the Cretaceous, right alongside the dinosaurs.
So they were already there, just waiting in the wing.
Waiting in the wings, exactly. But the extinction event facilitated an ecological release.
Meaning?
When the pterosaurs died out, the air traffic control cleared. The skies were empty. This allowed those pre-existing bird lineages to suddenly explode in diversity and take over those empty niches.
And the source mentions a split happening here.
Yes, we see a clear distinction forming very early on between teleraves, which are the land birds, and aquitaraves, the water birds.
It's really a story of opportunism, life just aggressively filling every available crack in the pavement.
That's the hallmark of the Paleocene.
But just as life is getting comfortable, getting bigger, diversifying across the globe, the planet throws a massive curveball. And this isn't a cold curveball, it's a completely boiling hot one. we need to talk about the PTM.
The Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, roughly 56 million years ago.
I have to say, this section of the report felt a little too relevant to today. I was reading the numbers and getting a bit of a chill.
It is widely considered the closest ancient analog we have to our modern anthropogenic situation.
Yeah.
The PTM was a massive, incredibly rapid global warming event.
Let's hit the numbers on this.
We are talking about the injection of over 2,000 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere and oceans.
2,000 gigatons, and the temperature spike from that was huge, right? 5 to 8 degrees Celsius?
Yes, a rise 5 to 8 degrees in global mean surface temperature. And crucially, that happened over a period of just 15,000 to 20,000 years.
Which is incredibly fast for the planet. Which brings us to the detective work. How do we actually know this happened? The report spends a lot of time on a carbon isotope excursion. And I'll be honest, my eyes started to glaze over a bit there.
It sounds dense, but it's actually a brilliant piece of forensics.
Okay, break it down for us. What is an isotope excursion?
Think of it as a chemical fingerprint left in the rocks. Carbon isn't just one uniform thing, it comes in different weights or isotopes. The most common is carbon-12. We call that light carbon.
Okay, light carbon.
And a tiny fraction of carbon in the world is carbon-13, which has an extra neutron. We call that heavy carbon.
Got it. Light and heavy.
Here's the key to the whole mystery. Living things, plants, animals, bacteria, they are inherently lazy, or rather, thermodynamically efficient.
Makes sense.
They prefer to build their bodies out of the light carbon-12 because it is energetically easier to process. So anything biological is absolutely packed full of light carbon compared to the background environment.
So I'm made of light carbon.
Yeah.
A tree outside is made of light carbon.
Exactly. But things like rocks, volcanoes, the mantle of the Earth, they have a much higher mix of that heavy carbon-13.
Okay, I'm with you.
So when geologists look at the rock record from exactly 56 million years ago, they suddenly see the ratio of heavy to light carbon just crash globally. It drops by 4 to 5 per mil.
Meaning the rocks and ocean sediments are suddenly flooded with light carbon?
Precisely. And since light carbon is the distinct signature of biology, we know this global warming wasn't just caused by a standard volcanic eruption releasing mantle gas.
The carbon had to come from something that was once alive.
It had to be organic carbon. Massive, massive amounts of it.
That is fascinating. It's like finding a fingerprint at a crime scene that explicitly says this was an inside job by the biosphere. So where is all this organic carbon hiding before it hit the atmosphere?
It's a bit of a geological murder mystery, and the report lists a few main suspects. One leading hypothesis is the methane burp.
The methane burp. It sounds a bit comical, but it's actually terrifying. It's the thermal dissociation of methane hydrates.
Right, and methane hydrates sound like sci-fi fuel, but they're very real. On the continental shelves, deep underwater, you have millions of years of dead plankton rotting.
Producing methane gas.
Yes, but because it's at the bottom of the ocean where it's very cold and under immense pressure, that methane gas gets trapped inside a literal lattice of ice water molecules. It is frozen gas.
So the ocean floor is basically a giant freezer full of methane.
Correct. But if you warm the deep ocean just a tiny bit, or if you change the deep ocean currents, that ice lattice destabilizes and breaks.
And the freezer door opens.
The methane, which remember is a super potent greenhouse gas and is loaded with that biological light, carbon bubbles up to the surface in massive quantities.
And boom, global warming on steroids.
Exactly. Now, there are other theories in the report, too, like magma baking through massive coal seams in the North Atlantic or permafrost thawing. But the end result is the same. A colossal carbon bomb went off.
And the impact on life was drastic. The report talks about severe ocean acidification.
It was devastating. When you dissolve that much CO2 in water, it creates carbonic acid. The acidification was so intense in the deep sea during the PTM that the calcium carbonate shells of marine organisms were completely dissolved.
It just melted them away.
Literally. In sediment cores from this exact time period, there's a distinct layer of red clay where the usual white carbonate sediment just vanishes.
Wow.
This led to a massive global extinction of benthic foraminifera, which are these tiny, crucial organisms living on the seafloor.
And what about up on the surface? Was it any better?
Not in tropics. The tropics effectively became a dead zone. Surface temperatures hit over 36 degrees Celsius.
36 Celsius, that's hot tub temperature for the ocean.
Right. Single-celled eukaryotes simply disappeared from those latitudes entirely due to heat stress.
It was just too hot for complex life to function.
But at the poles...
This is the part that completely blows my mind. The poles were subtropical.
Yes. Antarctica had sea surface temperatures of around 20 degrees Celsius.
20 degrees. You could have gone swimming off the coast of Antarctica without a wetsuit.
You could have. The fossil records from the PTM show palm trees and crocodile ancestors living near the Arctic Circle.
It's so hard to picture. But the mammals on land, they seem to handle this chaos in some really interesting ways. They didn't just all die out, they move.
They did. High-latitude land bridges opened up because the ice was completely gone and the far north was warm and lush. This allowed for a massive global dispersal of species.
A global mixer.
Exactly. We see the simultaneous sudden appearance of primates, Perissodactyla, which are the odd-toed ungulates like horses and rhinos, and Artiodactyla, the even-toed ones appearing in North America, Europe, and Asia all at once.
But surviving the heat had a cost. The report calls it the Lilliput effect.
A truly fascinating physiological phenomena.
Oh.
During the absolute peak heat of the PTM, we see widespread dwarfing in many mammal lineages.
They shrank.
They did. The ancestors of modern horses, for example, Cephippus, an early horse, shrank by about 30% during the hottest part of the event.
Why shrink? Is it just because small things cool down faster, like a surface area to volume ratio thing?
That's definitely part of it. Bergman's rule in ecology suggests animals are generally smaller, warmer climates to help shed body heat. But the report highlights that there is likely a strong nutritional aspect to it as well.
How so?
High CO2 makes plants grow very fast, but they become the equivalent of junk food.
High sugar, low protein.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They get loaded with carbon compounds, but become depleted in nitrogen and protein. So you have a hotter world with much less nutritious food available per bite. The mammals essentially shrank to cope with the lower calorie density of the plants.
So we have this hot, globally connected world filled with tiny horses eating junk food. That's the Eocene greenhouse peak. But as we move through the Eocene from 56 down to about 34 million years ago, the hothouse party starts to wind down. The planet begins this really long-term cooling trend.
This is where we have to shift our focus from atmospheric chemistry to the tectonic engine, because the literal movement of the continents is about to completely rewrite the climate.
Specifically, a very slow-motion continental car crash, India hitting Asia.
The Himalayan orogeny. It is one of the most significant tectonic events in Earth's entire history. When the Indian plate collided with the Eurasian plate, it crumpled the Earth crust and pushed up the Himalayas and the massive Tibetan Plateau.
And the source claims this mountain range basically acted as a global thermostat.
In a way, yes. It triggered what we call the silicate weathering mechanism on a planetary scale.
Okay, let's unpack that mechanism. Because to me, mountains are just big piles of rocks. How does a rock suck carbon dioxide out of the air and cool the planet?
It's basic high school chemistry, but operating over millions of years. Imagine you uplift vast quantities of fresh rock from deep underground, specifically silicate minerals like granite.
Okay, so you have thousands of miles of fresh rock newly exposed to the sky.
Now, rain falls on this rock. But rain isn't just pure H2O. As rain falls through the atmosphere, it picks up CO2, making it slightly acidic.
It turns into carbonic acid, so all rain is naturally a very weak acid rain?
Naturally, yes. When that weak acid hits the freshly exposed silicate rock in the mountains, a chemical reaction occurs. The acid slowly dissolves the rock, breaking it down into clay and dissolved ions.
Okay.
Crucially, this chemical weathering reaction actually consumes the CO2 molecules from the rainwater.
It literally eats the carbon.
It locks it away chemically. The carbon ends up as a bicarbonate ion dissolved in the runoff water. It washes down the mountain streams, into the massive rivers like the Ganges and the Indus, and flows into the ocean.
And then what happens to it in the ocean?
Eventually, marine creatures use that dissolved bicarbonate to build their calcium carbonate shells. When they die, they sink to the bottom, and that carbon settles on the seafloor as limestone.
So the Himalayas act like a giant natural CO2 scrubber. The carbon goes from the air to the rain to the rock, down the river to the ocean, and gets buried at the bottom of the sea.
Exactly. And because the Himalayas are so impossibly huge and they erode so fast, think of the intense monsoon rains constantly washing over them, they scrub vast amounts of CO2 out of the atmosphere over millions of years.
But wait, I saw a plot twist in the notes here. The report mentions some new research that suggests it's not quite that simple.
It never is in geology, is it? The twist is a process called petrogenic carbon oxidation, or OCPetro for short.
OCPetro? Sounds technical. What does it actually mean for the cooling trend?
It means that while the weathering of the fresh rock pulls CO2 down, the uplift of the mountains also exposes ancient sedimentary rocks to the air.
Wait, ancient sedimentary rocks? like old ocean floors?
Yes, rocks that were formed millions of years ago, which are absolutely full of dead organic matter, old carbon.
Ah, so when you expose that old carbon to the oxygen in the modern air,
It oxidizes. It essentially burns, chemically speaking, and that process releases CO2 back into the atmosphere.
so the mountains are scrubbing CO2 out of the air with one hand and releasing old CO2 back into the air with the other.
Precisely. It's a massive cycle. Recent studies suggest this release rate from the ancient rocks could actually be comparable to the emissions from volcanoes. So mountain building is both a sink for carbon and a source.
It's a complex tectonic tug of war.
Very much so. But over the long term of the Eocene, the cooling mechanisms along with the massive burial of organic carbon in the Indian Ocean, in the Bengal fan, they began to win out. The CO2 levels steadily dropped.
And there was another huge tectonic player here, too, the ocean gateways. Down south, Antarctica was finally breaking up with its neighbors.
Yes, the isolation of Antarctica. For a very long time, Antarctica was connected to South America and Australia. This landmass blocked ocean water from flowing completely around it.
But as those continents finally pulled away,
It opened up the Drake Passage between South America and Antarctica and the Tasmanian Gateway between Australia and Antarctica.
and this created the force field.
That is a great way to visualize it. The Antarctic Circumpolar Current, or the ACC. Once those gateways opened deep enough, ocean water could flow uninterrupted completely around the continent, west to east.
A continuous loop.
And this current thermally isolated Antarctica. It acted as an impenetrable barrier, preventing the warm tropical surface waters from ever reaching the pole.
So instead of warm water mixing in and keeping the continent somewhat toasty, Antarctica just sat there, trapped in a swirl of its own cold water, getting colder and colder and colder.
Exactly. It was locked in a freezer of its own making.
Yeah.
And the report notes that the timing of this has been updated recently.
Oh.
Yes, tracing neodymium isotopes from fossilized fish teeth suggests that these shallow gateways were actually active as early as 41 million years ago, which is significantly earlier than we previously thought.
So the freezer door was shut early.
Right, which helps explain why the global cooling trend really gained momentum long before the massive ice sheets actually formed.
Which brings us perfectly to the tipping point, the Eocene-Oligocene transition, the EOT. We're at about 33.9 million years ago.
This is the exact moment Earth crossed the threshold from greenhouse to icehouse. We call it the OI1 event.
What exactly happens during the OI1 event?
A sudden drastic shift. The deep ocean cools globally by 1 to 2 degrees Celsius very rapidly. And crucially, we see the explosive growth of very first permanent continental scale ice sheets on Antarctica.
And the sea levels responded to all that water getting locked up in ice.
Drastically. Sea levels dropped by roughly 80 meters, plus or minus 25 meters.
80 meters. I mean, that is a massive change in the global coastline. That's burying Florida completely, and then some.
It reshaped the maps of every continent. And the climate modeling in the report suggests this happened because atmospheric CO2 finally dropped below a specific tipping point.
Do we know what the number was?
Estimates vary, but the consensus range is between 560 to 840 parts per million by volume.
Okay, I want you to explain this tipping point concept here. Because it implies a sudden drop. Why does it happen all of a sudden? Why not just a slow, gradual growth of ice as it cools?
Because of climate feedback loops, specifically the albedo effect.
Mm-hmm.
Ice is white. It reflects solar radiation back into space incredibly efficiently.
So it bounces the heat away.
Right. Once you have enough ice to reflect a significant amount of heat back into space, the local area cools further, which allows more ice to grow, which reflects even more heat.
It's a runaway train.
Exactly. Once CO2 got low enough to let that initial ice survive the summer melt, the ice took over the driving seat. It forced the climate into a new, colder equilibrium.
And for life on Earth, crossing this threshold was an absolute shock to the system. In Europe, the fossil record shows an event they call the Grande Coupure.
The Great Cut. It was a massive, brutal extinction event for European mammals. You have to imagine the context. Europe during the Eocene was essentially an archipelago of tropical islands.
Lush, wet jungle islands.
Yes, full of these archaic, specialized creatures like paleothers, early relatives of horses and rhinos.
And then the lights went out on the hothouse.
The climate shifted dramatically from dense tropical forests to open, seasonal temperate woodlands. It got much drier, it got much colder. The archaic mammals that had perfectly adapted to the lush, soft life just couldn't cope with the change. They went extinct en masse.
And nature abhors a vacuum, so they were replaced?
Yes, by more modern lineages migrating in from Asia as sea levels dropped and land bridges formed. But the key evolutionary change here was in the diet.
Because the plants changed.
Right. This new world was harsher, the food was tougher, the plants were more fibrous and harder to break down,
Yeah.
and this is exactly when we see the explosive rise of the ruminants.
Animals with the multi-chambered stomachs, like cows, sheep, deer.
Exactly. They evolved an internal fermentation tank.
That's a great way to put it.
It allowed them to host bacteria that could break down cellulose. This let them process low-quality, highly fibrous forage that archaic animals simply couldn't digest.
So it was a brilliant adaptation to a cooling, drying world. They could literally eat the cardboard of the plant world and thrive.
They absolutely conquered the new landscape.
So we've frozen Antarctica, we've dropped the global temperature. Now we move forward into the Neogene period, the Miocene, the Pliocene epochs, and looking at the sources, the world starts to look a lot more grassy.
Yes, the widespread savannification of the planet. Around 20 million years ago, continued cooling and drying led to the massive retreat of global forests. And in their place, we see the explosion of grasslands across Africa, Asia, and the Americas.
And the report makes a really big deal about C4 versus C3 plants during this time. Now, I know C4 is an explosive, but I assume we aren't talking about exploding grass on the savanna?
No, though C4 grass did explode in terms of ecological popularity, it actually refers to the plant's photosynthesis pathway.
Okay.
Most ancient plants and most trees and shrubs today use what's called the C3 pathway. But by the late Miocene, around 8 million years ago, C4 grasses began to absolutely take over these open environments.
What is the biological advantage of C4? Why did they win?
It is basically turbocharged photosynthesis. C4 plants evolved a specialized mechanism to physically concentrate CO2 inside their leaves before processing it.
Oh, wow. So they hoard it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This makes them incredibly more efficient in atmospheric conditions where overall CO2 is low, or in environments where it is very hot and dry and they need to keep their pores closed to save water.
So as the CO2 levels kept dropping globally because of the Himalayas weathering away, the old C3 plants started choking, and the C4 plants basically stepped up and said, we got this.
Exactly. They are the highly specialized, drought-tolerant warriors of the plant world.
But grass is incredibly tough to eat. It's full of silica. This brings us to a part of the report I loved, the grit debate. It completely upturns what I learned in high school biology.
Yes, the classic evolutionary arms race story.
Hmm.
We observe in the fossil record that grazing mammals like horses evolved hypsodont teeth over this period.
Hypsodon meaning high-crowned teeth.
Right. Think of a human tooth. It has a short crown that sits above the gum and a root below. Once you grind the enamel on the crown down, it's gone. But a horse tooth is like a tall pillar.
Most of the tooth is actually hidden below the jawline.
Exactly. As the top grinds away from chewing, the tooth continuously erupts further out of the jaw. It provides a self-renewing grinding surface for a very long time.
And the old theory I learned was that the grass essentially fought back against the grazers.
Right. The traditional theory was that grasses evolved silica phytoliths, which are basically microscopic glass shards inside their leaves, specifically to deter herbivores from eating them.
So the herbivores had to evolve taller teeth to keep from grinding their teeth down to the raw nerves. An evolutionary arms race between grass and horse.
But the source material highlights that.
Mm.
Maybe that's not the whole story.
The new theory suggests it wasn't the grass itself that caused the tall teeth, it was the grit.
The dirt.
Just dirt.
Think about where these animals are actually eating. Open, dry savannas. Windy, dusty plains. When an animal is feeding that low to the ground in that specific environment, you aren't just eating a clean salad.
You were eating a salad that has been dropped in the sand.
Yes, you inevitably ingest a massive amount of environmental soil, sand, and dust, along with the grass.
So horses evolved long teeth because they were eating dirt sandwiches every day?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
The mechanical abrasion from that constant environmental grit is now thought to be the primary driver for the evolution of taller teeth, not just the internal silica defenses of the plants.
That's such a great example of how we have to look at the entire environment, not just the isolated food source. And looking at the horse lineage specifically, the Equidae family, you can track this transition perfectly through the Cenozoic.
You really do. It's a textbook example. You go from small, multi-tube browsers, like Hyracotherium, living in the soft, wet Eocene forests.
Eating soft leaves.
Right. And then you track them as they become larger, single-coat grazers like Merychippus in the Miocene, and finally the modern Equus genus.
They lost their side toes.
They did, to become much more efficient runners on the hard, open plains to escape predators. And their teeth became those tall pillars to withstand a literal lifetime of grinding, abrasive, gritty food.
It's a perfect example of the landscape literally shaping the anatomy of the animal.
Now, let's jump forward to about 3 million years ago, the Pliocene epoch. We are getting very close to the modern world map here, but there's one last huge piece of the tectonic puzzle missing. Panama, the closure of the Central American Seaway, the final formation of the Isthmus of Panama. This is a massive watershed event in Earth's history. Before this, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans flowed freely back and forth between North and South America.
It was open ocean. And when that door closed, it caused absolute chaos. First, let's talk about the biological chaos. The Great American Biotic Interchange, or GABI.
It was a massive biological swap meet. South America had been a completely isolated island continent for tens of millions of years, evolving its own bizarre, unique fauna.
Giant sloths, terror birds.
Exactly. But when the land bridge finally formed, the gates opened. North America sent cats, bears, mastodons, and horses south. And South America sent massive ground sloths, armadillos, and opossums north.
It's still weird to think of the opossum in my backyard as a South American immigrant.
They are definitely one of the great success stories of the northbound migration. Most of the South American native fauna didn't fare as well against the northern predators. But the climate consequence of Panama closing is even more fascinating and paradoxical.
Right. The report says that blocking the tropical water from mixing actually helped cause the massive ice ages in the north. And reading that, it just doesn't make intuitive sense.
It really doesn't at first glance.
Because if you block the flow between the oceans, you force that warm Caribbean water to deflect north up the coast via the Gulf Stream. Shouldn't a stronger, hotter Gulf Stream make the Arctic warmer, not colder?
It is entirely counterintuitive. Yes, the intensified Gulf Stream brought immense heat to the North Atlantic. It warmed Europe significantly. But you have to think about what warm water does when it hits cold air.
Okay, it evaporates, so you have a lot more steam coming off the ocean.
Exactly. You are suddenly pumping massive amounts of moisture into the high northern latitudes. And moisture is the critical raw material for snow.
Ah.
Before Panama closed, the Arctic was very cold, yes, but it was essentially a dry desert. Now, you have freezing air mixing with incredibly wet air.
So it snows a lot.
It snows heavily and constantly. And if it snows enough during the winter, that snow doesn't have time to melt in the summer.
Which brings back the albedo effect.
Precisely. The white snow reflects the summer sunlight, which cools the region further, which preserves more snow the next year. Paradoxically, that warm, moisture-rich current is what provided the fuel to build the massive, multi-kilometer-thick northern hemisphere ice sheets.
So the warm water brought the snow, and the snow built the ice. That is wild.
It's a perfect example of climate complexity. And this closure also wreaked absolute havoc in the oceans themselves.
The marine consequences.
Right. The changing global currents and the rapidly cooling temperatures severely altered marine food webs. Upwelling zones shifted. This disruption is directly linked to the extinction of the giant predatory shark, Otodus megalodon, in the Pliocene.
Exit the megalodon, enter the modern whales.
Exactly. Whales had been evolving since the early Eocene, but the modern baleen and toothed whales really exploded in diversity in response to these newly established cold currents and highly productive feeding zones. They are true creatures of this new, cooler ocean circulation.
So now we cross into the Quaternary period, the last 2.58 million years, the Ice Ages proper. And the report notes that the rhythm of the entire planet changes here. We stop just drifting colder and start pulsing.
Yes. We entered the strict domain of the Milankovitch cycles.
These are the orbital wobbles, right? I always mix the three of them up.
It's a lot to keep track of. Think of it as a very complex celestial clockwork that dictates our climate. There are three main hands on this clock. First, you have eccentricity, which is the shape of Earth's orbit around the sun.
Sometimes it's a perfect circle, sometimes it's an oval.
Exactly. And that cycle takes roughly 100,000 years to complete.
Okay, oval versus circle, 100,000 years. Got it.
The second hand is obliquity, the actual tilt of the Earth's axis. It rocks back and forth between about 22 and 24 degrees. That cycle takes 41,000 years.
And tilt determines the seasons, so that dictates how extreme the summer or winter is.
Correct. More tilt means stronger seasons. And the third hand is precession, the wobble of the axis itself as it rotates, sort of like a spinning top starting to lose its speed. That cycles every 23,000 years.
And all three of these overlapping cycles combined determine exactly how much sunlight hits the northern hemisphere during the summer.
Exactly. When these three cycles align to make the northern summers unusually cool, the winter ice survives the melt. The glaciers grow. When they align to make the summers hot, the ice melts back rapidly. They are the metronome pacing the glacial and interglacial cycles.
But the report mentions a major shift in the rhythm, the mid-Pleistocene transition.
Yes. Roughly 1 million years ago, the heartbeat changed. For reasons we are still trying to fully model, the climate shifted its primary response from the 41,000-year Tolt cycles to the intense 100,000-year eccentricity cycles.
Meaning?
The ice ages got significantly longer, and the ice sheets got much, much deeper.
And right in the middle of this violently oscillating, freezing and thawing world, a very strange ape starts walking completely upright.
The human element.
We have to talk about us. We often think, or at least I was taught, that we evolved for a very specific environment. Like the savanna hypothesis, we stood up to look over the tall grass. But the report introduces this concept called the variability selection hypothesis, which suggests almost the exact opposite.
It does. It suggests that our key defining human traits, our massive brains, our complex tool use, our incredible dietary flexibility, they didn't evolve to fit into a stable, specific niche.
So what did they evolve for?
They evolved specifically to handle instability.
So we are essentially specialists in chaos.
In a biological sense, yes. Look closely at the timeline in the report. Australopithecus afarensis, the famous Lucy fossil, appears around 3 million years ago. She is dealing with Pliocene woodlands that are actively starting to fragment and dry out due to cooling.
Right.
Then Homo erectus disperses out of Africa around 1.8 million years ago. That happens right during the onset of the early Pleistocene glaciations, when the climate swings are getting fierce.
And what about us, Homo sapiens?
We arrive on the scene roughly 300,000 years ago, right in the thick of the mid-Pleistocene transition, when those massive 100,000-year ice age cycles are absolutely dominating the planet.
The report mentions this ebb and flow of populations, too.
Yes, hominin populations constantly expanded and contracted with the ice sheets. We followed the habitable zones as they shifted. We were what ecologists call a source and sink species, constantly on the move, constantly having to adapt to rapidly changing hydroclimates and new food sources.
So if the environment had just been stable, like, say, the early Eocene greenhouse where food was everywhere, we might have just stayed happy, specialized apes in the trees.
It is highly likely we would not have developed our defining cognitive traits. Because the Cenozoic climate became so volatile, nature strongly selected for an animal with a brain flexible enough to solve entirely new survival problems every few thousand years.
So we are literally children of the icehouse. Our entire intelligence is just a survival strategy for a broken, fluctuating climate.
That is a very apt summary.
That is a deeply humbling thought. So, looking back at this massive 66 million year journey, from the asteroid impact wiping the slate clean, through the sweltering hothouse, the tectonic mountain building, the freezing of Antarctica, the spread of the grasslands, to the chaotic rise of humans, what is the grand synthesis here? What does all this deep time history actually mean for us sitting here today?
I think the absolute key takeaway from all the sources is the deep connectivity of Earth systems. You cannot touch one single bile without spinning all the others.
It's all linked.
Intrinsically. Tectonics like India colliding with Asia or the Panama Isthmus closing changes the physical geography. That physical change reroutes the ocean currents and alters the global carbon cycle.
Which then drives the climate.
Exactly. And the shifting climate is what ultimately drives biological adaptation.
It's an unstoppable cascade.
It is. And the fossil record shows us that life doesn't just passively endure these cascades. It innovates. C4 turbocharged photosynthesis, the self-renewing hypsodont teeth in horses, the extreme flexibility of human intelligence. These are all incredible biological innovations born directly from severe environmental stress.
And for the learner listening to this deep dive right now, why does the Cenozoic matter today? Aside from the obvious fact that we live in the tail end of it.
Because it provides the absolute critical context for our current anthropogenic situation. For example, the PTM provides a benchmark. It shows us exactly what happens to the oceans and the biosphere when you inject massive amounts of carbon into the atmosphere rapidly.
It gives us the historical precedent for ocean acidification and forced global migration.
Right. And perhaps even more importantly, the Cenozoic illustrates the concept of tipping points.
The thresholds.
Critical thresholds. The Eocene-Oligocene transition shows us that the Earth's climate system has hard boundaries. You can push it and push it for a while, but once you cross a certain chemical level, like that 560 to 840 ppm range of CO2 for the Antarctic ice sheet, the entire system flips into a completely new state.
It exhibits hysteresis.
Exactly. Once it flips, it's incredibly hard to go back to the way it was.
And we are currently in an icehouse state, geologically speaking. I mean, we still have massive ice caps at the poles.
We do. But chemically speaking, we are actively pushing the atmosphere back toward an Eocene greenhouse. We're currently sitting around 420 parts per million of CO2.
Which is rapidly approaching the bottom end of those tipping points we just discussed.
It is. The central lesson of the entire Cenozoic story is that when you drastically change the chemistry or the geography of the planet, the biosphere will inevitably change to match it. It creates a completely new normal.
The planet catches up. It just takes a few 100,000 years to do it.
Correct. Life as a whole is incredibly resilient, but it operates purely on geological time. We operate on human time.
And that's the real tension, isn't it? We are pushing the planetary buttons at a PTM speed, but we're living our daily lives in a civilization built specifically for the stability of the icehouse.
Indeed, we are caught between the two.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on after this deep dive. We've seen exactly how life recovers from catastrophe. We've seen massive ecological vacuums get filled by high-protein beings and rapidly growing mammals. We've seen tiny horses shrink to survive heat and ancient wolves walk back into the sea to become whales. We are currently altering the planet's fundamental chemistry at a speed that rivals the greatest thermal shock of the last 66 million years. The biosphere will absolutely recover from whatever we do. It always does. But the question the Cenozoic forces us to ask is, what will that new recovery actually look like? And when the dust settles, will we be the archaic mammals left behind in the next Grand Coupure, or will we be the adaptable innovators?
That is the ultimate question we have to answer.
Something to really think about next time you see a horse eating grass. Or, just chewing on some dirt. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Cenozoic. We'll catch you on the next one.